Hey, deserving listeners, I have a backlog of emails from y'all regarding ethics, and I thought I would read and answer them now. We have an email from patron Arias from Florida. They say, I want to thank you for giving me the courage to walk out during a therapy session. Today I walked out during a session after my therapist disclosed another client's first name, age, and information about their gender transition. We were talking about using gender-neutral names for aunt and uncle, and she said she would ask another client's first name about what term they use. All right, so just chiming in so everyone understands. So patron Arias, they were in session, and the therapist and the client were talking about using gender-neutral names for aunt and uncle, and the therapist said that she would ask, Jane or something. There's another client, and she's like, oh, I'm going to ask Jane or John or whatever about what term they use. And going on with the email. So that's potentially a break in confidentiality, right? Because you're revealing that you're working with this other client. Going on. She said that this other person is a client who she has seen for several years, and then she gave me a brief overview of their gender transition and the client's age. When I told her that this made me feel weird, she apologized for making me uncomfortable. And she said the other client is okay with her talking about them. And I said that I thought it was a breach in confidentiality and I wouldn't want her talking to other clients about our sessions, and that I wanted to leave this session. She apologized again for upsetting me, but I think she was missing the point. I plan on firing her, but I am not sure if I should also file a report with the government about a potential HIPAA violation. Any thoughts or guidance would be really helpful here. Thank you. End of email. Yeah, well, let's break this down. So let's first talk about confidentiality. Did the therapist break confidentiality? The answer is, we don't know. It depends. Did the other client provide written consent to disclose that information to anyone? It's possible. What the therapist said is that the client did grant permission, but the way that the therapist said that, it sounds a little dubious, but who knows? We don't know. We don't know if confidentiality was broken. We don't know if harm happened to this other person. The other question is, did the other client provide verbal consent? Usually when we're talking about release of information and disclosing information about a client, we're talking about a written agreement that it is okay to do so. But there are situations in which verbal consent is sufficient according to experts and licensing boards. Now, of course, if you're in doubt as a therapist, you never want to only get verbal consent, but it could have been granted verbally and the client in question might agree with that. Yeah, I said we didn't sign anything formally, but I told the therapist that it would be okay to give out my name as someone who is going through this. But I will say that it doesn't make any sense as to why the therapist disclose that information, and that is something that we do have ethical codes and guidelines around, which is that if whenever a disclosure happens, depending on the situation, we should ask ourselves, do we need to disclose? And in this situation, the therapist did not need to. The therapist was saying, I, as the therapist, am going to ask this other person what they do when it comes to gender-neutral ways of referring to aunt and uncle. So there was no reason why the therapist would say the client's name and age and details about it. The therapist could have said, I'm going to talk with someone I know, or I'm going to talk with a client about what they do and just not disclose anything. Like, why would the therapist disclose? So there's a bit of a judgment problem there. And I have to say for myself, I would have to be, even if I had written permission from a client to disclose their information, I still wouldn't in a scenario like that because of what you ran into as a client, in that you're off the cuff seeing that your therapist will just disclose information fairly freely. And some clients, many clients, myself included as a client, would get a little nervous about that. It's like, wait, so do you have some kind of internal alarm system before you disclose information? It's just a little worrisome. But in terms of making a report, do we know that confidentiality was broken? We don't, but neither do you, right? So if you made a report, they might look into it, right? Now, the therapist did say she had permission, but I think you have reasons to question that. Then you ask so then another question that we want to ask ourselves in terms of ethics outside of confidentiality is, did the therapist break trust with patron Arias as a client? And the answer to that is clearly. It sounds like the therapist was being haphazard about the disclosure, right? If the therapist had said something like, oh, I actually have an agreement with another client that I can disclose their name and information, and I'm about to do that. Now, why would you do that? Because you don't need to. But, if that was said beforehand or in the midst of it, like, oh, I'm going to talk with Jane about this because they said that they have a way of doing this. And so I'm going to ask them. And by the way, I have permission to disclose Jane's name because Jane gave me permission to do so. It sounds like the therapist just disclosed information about the client. Then you as a client said, wait, you're just going to tell me information about another client? And then the therapist said, oh, I have an agreement. That's not, best practice. It's not necessarily an ethical violation, but it's not good therapy because it's going to alarm people, And by the way, there are terms that people will use for gender neutral aunt and uncle, things like auntie or ankle. But I like to use the term like my dad's brother or my dad's sibling or something like that. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be dad's brother, it'd be dad's sibling because that's, more gender neutral. Anyway, so, or my parent's sibling, if both your parent and your aunt or uncle, auntie or ankle is non-binary. Anyway, going forward, then we would ask ourselves, should you file a report? The answer is it's up to you. But even if there was an ethical violation, I'm going to take a guess and say the board will either kick the can down the road or do nothing. At the very least, it would be a wake-up call to the therapist because the report would eventually get around to the therapist in all likelihood, and the therapist might be a little bit more cautious moving forward and realize that there are trust consequences with some clients, even if there wasn't an ethical violation, And you could also just tell your therapist verbally or through emails, like, I don't want to work with you anymore because of the haphazard way in which you disclose that information. You say that you have permission, but you didn't say that at first. And I don't know, it just seems sloppy to me. You didn't have to say that. And so I don't know if I can trust that you're being, if you're being sloppy in other areas, So you're not assuming that the therapist didn't have permission, but you're just saying it's a style thing that you just didn't like. The other question is, should you terminate? And it sounds like you're going to, but it really, if I could talk with you before you terminated, I would ask you, are you getting something out of the therapy? Because finding a good match is hard. So I wouldn't just give that up necessarily over this. Now, if you really wanted to, for sure, go for it. But it's potentially a rupture that could be repaired, and maybe that could be therapeutic. If you just say, hey, I need you to reassure me that you're not sloppy with confidentiality when it comes to me, because I do not want you talking about me or my name. And if I could advocate for other clients, I think you should just be more buttoned up about that sort of thing. You didn't even have to say this client's name, and you did. It just, I don't know. Or I get scared, just speak from your own feelings. If the therapist is good, I'm going to take a guess and say the therapist and you aren't really getting along that well to begin with, because from the sound of it, you were pretty quick to fire the therapist, and I'm going to take a guess and say that if you were to get another therapist, you would predict that you could easily find someone that you had a good enough bond or better than that therapist. Anyway, let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break. This next email is from patron and YouTube member Alicia from Syracuse. She says, "Hi, Dr. Honda. I was reading this Reddit post on our therapy, the therapy subreddit, and I was curious about what your thoughts are about it." Okay, so I'm going to read to you, listener, right now, the Reddit post. It says, "I received an email from an adult client's mother informing me of my client's unexpected death." Okay, so just making sure everyone understands that. So if I'm the therapist, I have someone contacting me saying that my client died, and it's the client's mother that's calling me. Okay. So going on, she sent me the obituary by replying to an email that I had sent the client. Okay, so just chiming in, what seems to have happened is that the mother the mother got access to the deceased daughter's email account and found an email from the therapist and sent the obituary by replying to an email. Going on, "I would like to respond and offer condolences and share how much I enjoyed getting to know her child. Is this ethical? It feels wrong not to reply at all. What would be the appropriate response? I'm also taking care of myself and processing my own emotions around this." Okay, so that's the end of the Reddit post, and then back to Alicia from Syracuse email. "A lot of folks differed on how to handle the situation the Redditor presented about their client dying and a family member emailing them about it. One of the most upvoted comments has replies about how dangerously unethical their response is. Personally, I can't see how it could be considered harming the client if they're dead." End of email. All right, so let's break this down. Confidentiality. To respond to this email that the mother sent would be a break in confidentiality, full stop, because the client never provided, I'm assuming, an ROI to talk with anyone, not particularly the mom, but including the mom. I said that funny. It would be a break in confidentiality, and that extends beyond death. Confidentiality extends beyond death. But could you respond without breaking confidentiality? And the answer for many people is yes, and I would agree with this. You could email back with something like, "Due to confidentiality ethics, I cannot confirm or deny that this person was a client, and I'm terribly, terribly sorry about that. It's a part of our profession for a lot of good reasons. Having said that, I very much appreciate you informing me, and I am so, so sorry for your loss. I wish I could go into more detail, but I'm bound by professional ethics, and I wish you well." Something like that. There's various different ways of saying it. Now, some would say, well, you're basically saying with that email that it was a client, that the person was working with you, and that would be a break in confidentiality. And the technical answer to that is yes, it is. Having said all that, I cannot imagine anyone complaining if you communicated like this, or even more so, or even went to the funeral. And if someone did complain to the licensing board or some other professional organization, I cannot imagine any legal authority or any professional organization chastising you or consequencing you or taking away your license. It's very common for therapists in a situation like this to put aside confidentiality and have some level of communication, whether it's an email or a phone conversation or attending the funeral or something, because what's the risk of harm? Now, if we get really technical, and this is true, and I agree with this, that even though the person is dead, they can be harmed if you just, if the therapist just told the entire family what the client was working on. One, it could be hurtful to family members, but also, even though the person's dead, I feel like most of us agree that it's immoral to harm someone, even if it's post-death. Even though they no longer materially are affected by things, it's still wrong. It's sort of like we have moral and ethical and legal concerns about having deceased actors or musicians, and you just resurrect them through AI and have them in a movie or something like that, and there's a lot of thought about that. Where's the line there? And so can you harm if you just are willy-nilly about breaking confidentiality? Yeah. But if you don't disclose anything that the client says, you're only acknowledging, yes, that person was a client of mine and I am very, very sad about it. I'm going to take a guess and say that most clients would be okay with that. And it would benefit a lot of things, including the therapist, right? I mean, we have to be human, after all, for everyone's sake, right? Now, the pushback, though, is that people seeing us break confidentiality in that way, attending the funeral or something, they would look at us and say, oh, wait, are therapists just breaking confidentiality left and right? Because it could be seen as unprofessional and it could be seen as representing the profession poorly, right? Which would result in harm overall because people might not seek out therapy for fear of therapists being sloppy about confidentiality. And that is a concern. And one that you could actually, and I have heard of therapists accounting for that by, maybe telling the mother, like, let's say you reply and you're like, yes, this was a client of mine. I'm so sorry. Thanks for telling me. Oh my God, like I really bonded with her and I'm just so sad about this. And, you don't disclose anything about the client. And then the mother says, if you want to come to the funeral, you can. And then you say, okay, I think I will. Thank you. I think I want to be there just for my own sake. But if you can, please don't tell anyone that I was her therapist because I don't want to give the impression that therapists are sloppy about confidentiality. So I'm just going to attend quietly, and you probably don't even know what I look like necessarily, so you won't recognize me. There'll just be a stranger in the back of the memorial or something, or whatever you say. And the mother will probably say, yeah, fine, I don't care. Because as long as you're not interacting with anyone, right, you're not alerting everyone that you're the therapist. And if someone were to ask you, how did you know her? You could just say like, I don't know, you could just make something up. Like I used to work with her a long time ago or something, or she's a friend of a friend or something. I don't know what you would say to get out of it, but you get my point. So yeah. And the bottom line is that novice therapists and kind of hacky therapists online on these online forums will always jump to the safest answer, which is to say that it's unethical and to never do it because they're not in this situation, And, if I had a nickel for every time I heard a novice hacky therapist say something was dangerously unethical, I would have thousands of nickels because it's a very complicated. Now, we don't want to be willy-nilly, and if you've listened to the podcast, you know that I am a stickler for ethics, absolutely. But we should not always default to everything being dangerously unethical all the time. Now, if you want to be safe, then great. But I've heard people say things where so if I came into a conversation about ethics among therapists that I didn't know that well, and all I heard was the ending conclusion that most people, at least the vocal people in the group, said, oh my God, that's dangerously unethical, I would have no idea if it was actually unethical or not, because most of the time when I hear that phrase, I don't agree with it. Now, it might be dangerously unethical, like maybe they heard about a client that was having sex with a client, that is dangerously unethical. But to say that to reply to an email from the mother and say just something like, "Oh my God, I'm so," the Reddit post, the person was like, "I want to respond and offer condolences and share how much I enjoyed getting to know this client," her child, the daughter of this mother that was emailing in. That's all. She just wants to offer condolences. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry that you for your loss. I really enjoyed getting to know this client, you name the person." That's all that this therapist was going to say. To say that's dangerously unethical. Is it technically unethical? Is it technically a HIPAA violation? I don't even know, honestly. I mean, in general, yes. Like if the client's alive and the mother contacts us and says something like, "I know you're working with my daughter, and I just want to let you know that she didn't come home last night because she's an addict," or something. I don't know. Yeah, we don't respond to that because that's breaking confidentiality, and it absolutely could harm the client, could definitely harm the trust with the client. But if the client is deceased and all you are doing is responding with condolences and saying that you enjoyed working with the client and thanks for informing me, like I said, I can't imagine anyone complaining. I can't imagine any licensing board taking issue with it if a complaint was submitted. So, yeah. All right, let's take a break. All right, this next email is from anonymous annual long-term patron, and the email isn't a clinical ethic question, but it's a general ethics question. She writes in and says, "Thank you so much for what you do. I've learned a lot from you, much of which I now rely on in my professional life and in my work, which is family law. I am in an ethical quandary. Here's some background. I've been dating a nice psychiatrist for 3 years. He is in the process of divorcing his estranged wife, who has strong borderline personality disorder traits. She has abused him in every imaginable way over 20 years and continues to do so. Very sadly, she also uses their 15-year-old son as a proxy between them." Okay, so just to review here, anonymous annual long-term patron is a lawyer working in family law, and she is dating a psychiatrist who is going through a divorce. And according to her, the soon-to-be ex-wife has strong borderline traits and is triangulating the 15-year-old son. Okay. "It's been difficult. He and I only see each other on alternate weekends when the son is meant to be with his mother. About 80% of the time when we're together, the wife and the son cook up drama, which in their minds demands my partner's immediate attention. If he fails to drop everything and comply with their demands, there are accusations of him prioritizing me and failing in his parental responsibilities. This invariably leads to threats of harm to me and my partner. She also threatens to falsely report my partner to the police for child abuse, child neglect, and child abduction. She also threatens suicide. She also threatens financial, career, and reputational ruination of my partner." All right, just chiming in here. Yeah, I mean, from your description, it sounds like somebody who is suffering from some sort of personality disorder and is extremely concerning. So I hope that he is documenting all this, because it could be helpful legally, if not in the divorce, And people who do this sort of thing often aren't careful about how they will, communicate, meaning that there's a paper trail for these behaviors. Anyway, twice the son has come to my partner's house when I was there and threatened to kill me. It was really frightening. Wow. Yikes. I haven't responded to any of these communications or episodes. My partner, for his part, says he does not want to rock the boat until his divorce is concluded. Yeah, just chiming in here. Your partner, the psychiatrist who is going through the divorce, there's no way to, there's no good scenario. You're picking from the lesser of several evils, and sometimes it very much is the lesser of all evils to not rock the boat and to put up with it and comply, because if you even attempt to push back, it will just create more drama, more difficulty, prolong the divorce process. And although that's not fair to anyone, including you, it, again, could be the lesser of several evils going on. I'm not sure he ever intends to deal with his wife and his son's behavior, though. There seems to be a strong element of shame for him, and he's very loyal to his son, so I don't know if he would actually do anything even after the divorce. Moving on to my quandary. The son is now determined to become a commercial pilot. My partner is very supportive of this and is coaching him heavily ahead of interviews and assessments for a cadet program, which would likely lead to a job as a pilot at the country's international airline. All right, so just chiming in here. So the son, 15 years old, is trying to get into a cadet program, and the father is coaching him heavily ahead of interviews about how to interview well to get into this cadet program. Now, I'm going to chime in here and say I'm guessing that it's many years before he would ever fly a commercial jet. I mean, I don't know how old you have to be, but I'm going to take a guess and say that's many years ahead. But going on, the son will, of course, not mention his mental health at the interviews or assessments, and I suspect his father will have given him all of the right answers so no red flags are raised during these assessments. My own father held quite a senior position in the Air Force, so I know a bit about medical disqualifications for pilots. Personality disorders and psychosis are two of them. I have an acquaintance who provides health services and medicals for air crew and other employees at the International Airlines main hub. Applicants for the cadet program will be screened by my acquaintance's practice. Should I drop my acquaintance a line ahead of this, alerting the team to my concerns about the son's mental health? End of email. Yeah, I see the quandary. It's a tough situation. And again, lesser of several evils, because there's really no good answer. There's no safe, comfortable way out of this. If you report it, if you tell your friend, say, hey, I know one of your applicants personally, and let me give you a heads up that this guy is a disaster and has threatened to kill people, and he might have a personality disorder, so you probably want to know that before you consider letting him into the program, that kind of thing. Not only could you save this program, because, as a program director myself, when we let in students who, I'm not program director now, but have been, and I was a professor, full-time professor for many years. And when we got a student that was like this and they interviewed at least well enough, and then once they're in, it's like really hard to get them out. It's always nice if we get some information that could help us screen someone out before it's too late, that kind of thing. So you might save them. But I think more importantly, you're concerned about the lives of passengers, right? If he ends up becoming a commercial airline pilot, God knows. And there are cases of mentally disturbed pilots who will kill themselves and in the process kill everyone on the airplane. There have been at least 2 incidents that are known. It might have happened in other points in history, but there wasn't any indication of why the plane just decided to plummet out of the sky. But the German wings, it was a kind of a famous case from a while back where the pilot just set it on autopilot for the mountains, I think, in Europe, and just and was intending on killing himself, but he also killed everyone on board as well. He, I think, locked out the other pilot from the cockpit, that sort of thing. And there was another case in Africa, if I'm not mistaken. And I think with that one, it's not as clear because we don't know if it was suicide. But the German wings one, I'm pretty sure we do. Anyway, you could save lives. Now, is that likely to happen with him if he were to become a pilot? Not super high. Could you not report and count on the program figuring it out, because people who are disturbed usually show signs? You could. Or could you maybe wait on making a report for later? Because say he goes into the cadet program maybe he changes his mind about his career. I mean, he's only 15, so chances are this is not the ending career that he will pursue later on in life. So you could just say, oh, I don't think he's going to become a commercial pilot in the end, so I don't need to, or at least I don't need to do anything right now. Yeah. Having said that, if he's really determined to become a commercial airline pilot and he's already starting the initial training or the initial experiences to get there, there's a greater likelihood that he will stick with it. So there's a lot of things. But if you do report, what if he finds out and he decides to kill you? Like he doesn't get in. What if you estrange your boyfriend, this psychiatrist? If you make a report, I'm going to take a guess and say that your partner, the father of the kid, does not want you to make that report, but maybe he's okay with it, or I don't know. Maybe you do it anonymously. Is that possible? So yeah, and also just the ongoing stress. That's what I would be feeling of if I make the report. I would feel a lot of stress, particularly at night when I am trying to fall asleep and my mind starts to wander, and I would wonder if word got back to him and he's going to do something to harm me or my husband or my boyfriend or something, Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't report, but I get your dilemma. As a citizen, I'll say I appreciate it when people make these reports because things like this can happen in all sorts of arenas, whether it's a pilot or a law enforcement officer or a teacher or a therapist or something. These people have a lot of power and authority and can harm people. And when no one reports or they kick it down the road or they sweep it under the rug, bad things can happen. And I watch a lot of aviation YouTube channels and have seen a lot of mini documentaries about pilots who were unfit, who ended up killing people because of their unfitness. And sometimes there is evidence that someone could have said something and didn't. And as a result, it might have led to this pilot continuing to be able to fly, and then people die. So as a citizen, I would say I enjoy it when people make these kind of reports, specifically because I want to trust that pilots aren't at risk of something like this. Having said that, and I think you said this in the email, it's not a clear association. The kinds of things that he's suffering from aren't, it's not automatic that he would be a bad pilot, right? Even if he did have some kind of personality problem. Also, we don't know what he's going to be like as an adult. Right now, he's completely entwined in his mother's disorder and paranoia and triggering, right? It sounds like if she is borderline, she is triggered by the abandonment. And when you are with him, when the kid is with the mom, she is ruminating and obsessing that, oh my God, my husband, my former partner is with her right now. And that can be extremely triggering for people who have abandonment and betrayal trauma, like borderline people, and they can't get out of that. And it is very destabilizing. And if they grew up with abuse, they turn to abuse as a solution. And then the kid is, even though deep down he might not be on board with the mom, he has no choice, right? Because he knows unconsciously or consciously that the only way to survive is to go along with it, maybe even prove to the mother that he is loyal to her, right? Now, post childhood, right, when he's in his 20s, as he's starting to become a pilot, hopefully he'll be out from underneath that abusive entanglement. Who knows? You're concluding that his behavior is from him and that will carry on into later life, and that could, but we just don't know. So I don't know. I get the dilemma. Personally, I would say that because this isn't a professional question, this is like a citizen question. That I would wait. I would have it in my back pocket, but you just don't know what the future holds. He could change, right? He could just decide not to become a pilot later in life. He could be discovered by not only the assessment screening program, but even in the program, they might discover something, right? Or they could discover that he has a problem, but it doesn't really interfere with him being a pilot. So there's no immediate threat right now. You can always report later. I think you're kind of worried that if he gets into the program, then it's harder to get him out, that kind of thing, So there's that. I would talk with your partner about it so that doesn't cause a rift if it comes out. I might do it anonymously if you were going to do it, But I think the bigger issue that I'm hearing from you is that you feel alone. You feel attacked. You feel under threat by these monsters, these people. And your partner, the psychiatrist, the soon-to-be ex-husband, you don't feel like he's necessarily on your side. And you have one sort of lever of power, which is to make this report because your dad was in the Air Force and this guy who does the medicals. And so you have this way of asserting power and attaining some level of safety, which I think is more the issue, which I totally understand. And again, there's no good answer to this, right? Because if your partner were to be more supportive, and it sounds like he is somewhat supportive, right? But if he were to be completely on board with your point of view, it might be hard for him to sustain not making waves so that he can get out of this fucking marriage, It's just a really screwed situation. You're screwed. There's no easy answer, and it's hard. It's really hard. So I would say at the very least, I hope that you have a lot of support yourself outside of being with your boyfriend, because he can only provide so much support and he needs a lot of support. And I would, as a lawyer, I'm sure that you have some legal recourse when someone threatens to kill you. And I hope you made a police report, honestly. I mean, similar to, I like it when people make reports, that's important to document legally for various reasons, right? For safety, if he's threatening someone else, there's a record, there's a pattern, right? As a way to push back, show him like, look, there's a line. And you can't do. Now, maybe your boyfriend is like, don't make a police report. Maybe you do it anyway. I would, honestly. I just, there's a line. And if you threaten to kill someone, like, no. One, there's a lot of people who will do that in preparation for killing, and for some people, when you give them a consequence, they will pull back and stop even thinking necessarily about killing. If they feel like they can do whatever they want, then sometimes that, grows. But I don't know, I can't advise you on this confidently at all because there's, again, no easy answer. But anyway. All right, well, let's adjourn there. Everyone, and especially you, anonymous annual long-term patron, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, 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 really do.